welcome everybody. It's a full house. Thank you all for coming at this joint event of Radboud Reflects and Philosophie Oost-West, Philosophy East-West. And we're very happy to have you all here. And maybe it's not a big a surprise, as it's said to be the case that in almost 20% of all Dutch have to deal with depression at one point in their lives. So it's a personal thing, maybe for 20% of the people here, maybe even more. Okay, but what are we then suffering from? Are we dealing with a depression epidemic, as philosopher Trudy de Hu once called it? And what kind of epidemic would that be? Where does it come from? Is it society that makes us ill? Could we imagine a different society in which we would not become ill of depression? Is there too much pressure to achieve individual success, or are we less equipped to deal with setbacks and with negative emotions? All questions we'll attend to at one point during this evening. And originally our intention was to offer a very broad perspective on depression in different cultures, which was still the title, and include the Eastern cultures, South American cultures, but then we had the possibility to have Pius Mosima here, an African philosopher from Cameroon. So we decided, no, we want to give it a bit more of a focus. So that's how we have two perspectives here today, our very familiar European perspective, and then of course, which is very broad as well, an African perspective. And what is that? Did I hear someone say that? We'll get to that. Because as Pius Mosima said in an interview today, we don't have a word for depression in any African language. So what does that mean? What does it tell us? So aside from him, we have two other speakers here tonight. I'll introduce the three of them. They will give each 20 minutes lecture, and afterwards have a discussion chaired by me. My name is Lisa Duland. I work as a program manager at Radboud Reflects. And then afterwards, there's of course, after the discussion, there's time for questions from you. But first, so the speakers. We'll start with a lecture by Jan Derksen. He is a clinical psychologist affiliated with the Radboud University and the Free University in Brussels. And among other things, he has written Free Psychology Out of the Grasp of the Brain Myth. In Dutch, Bevrijd de Psychologie uit de greep van de hersenmythe. 2012, and also another book, A Mental Illness for Everyone, Iedereen een psychische aandoening, more recent, 2015. And tonight he will guide us through thought on depression, because what are we talking about really, and what is depression? Has it changed in the past years? Then we'll go to Angela Roothaan. She's a philosopher and works at the Free University in Amsterdam. She's written on Spinoza, the experience of nature, spirituality and ghosts in modern culture. And more recently, her research focuses on African philosophy and shamanistic ontology. And she will guide us into the African philosophy somewhat. She'll bridge the gap between Europe and Africa. And then we have Pius Mosima, who is a philosopher, of course, and affiliated with the University of Bamenda in Cameroon. And he specializes in African and intercultural philosophy. And he will then guide us into African philosophy, intercultural philosophy specifically, and of course, an African take on depression. So that's the program for tonight. I hope you will enjoy it also, not get too depressed. And first, a warm welcome to Jan Derksen.
Lisa, I was a little worried when I understood that it was sold out. And that worrying doesn't stop. Now I see that there are many young people here, so I hope you all are interested in mood disorders, depressions, and culture, and I hope you are not suffering from mood disorders and suffering from a culture. Everybody's quiet, so hopefully it will be a joyful evening. And I learned to know Pius earlier, and I tried to assess him a little bit. There's nothing of a depression in that guy. Huh? He's really, he told me, I'm always enjoying life. Huh? I'm always walking around full of energy. So I thought maybe he's a little manic, but also no. So, and what happens with people who have a mood disorder or a major semi-depressive disorder? They suffer from life. They do not enjoy life. Enjoyment is in contradiction to a semi-depressed mood. And in a severe depression, gravity is pulling the body down. A depression is movement. When you look with a clinical eye, then you can notice immediately the way in which somebody is walking and making his or her gestures and talking. And is there energy? Is there spirit? Is it lively? When a mood disorder is present during a longer period, it pulls everything down to the earth. Gravity is more able to pull the body down than when there is no mood disorder. You also see that in those nice drawings. But of course, a mood disorder can vary a lot. When we started our clinical practice in 1979 on the countryside between Arnhem and Nijmegen, practically nobody had psychological or psychiatric help there, of about 68,000 people in villages. And then we were sent by the physicians to the houses of people who had, according to the physician, a request for help. And we found people lying in bed and being in the end stage of a mood disorder. And that end stage means that in psychologically, you are practically dead. You are not living anymore in a psychological way. Your body is still there, and you maintain your body, but your mind gave up. And in a severe mood disorder, all aspects of life are in disarray. You have problems with your energy. You feel very tired and fatigued. You have problems with eating. Your appetite got lost. You have problems in continuing on your work or study. There's no energy to continue working and studying, and there's no enjoyment of that anymore. Your interest in sexual activity, your libido, got lost. So life is not really more vividly inside of you. And in a crucial, psychological sense, your self-esteem, your identity, the view of yourself as a person, your self-image, is very negative, is inferior. When you ask these patients, do you feel equally to other people? Do you feel better than other people, or do you feel inferior? They will tell you quite fast, I feel inferior. I have severe self-blame. I have a lot of self-criticism, and I'm suffering under that criticism. Patients are unable to be very active, but they are also unable to have a normal sleep. So part of them are unable to start sleeping, they have problems falling asleep, and others tend to fall asleep, but then they wake up at around 3 o'clock. And then they have to go to the toilet, that's normal, and then it's impossible for them to sleep again. And they start brooding. They are brooding and thinking and having obsessed thoughts. So a real clinical depression is a severe disorder. And that clinical depression is not so frequent. We talk about mood disorders as the common cold. So that's the next to anxiety disorders, mood disorders are what appear most frequent in people's lives. But we just had the research in the youngsters between until 25 years. And then you saw, of course, the ADHD and autism nowadays and addictions. But there was one crucial sentence: anxiety and mood disorders are most frequent. And that's always like it is. So also in you, young people, if you have a psychological disorder, most of the time it has to do with anxiety or with a mood disorder, and normally a combination of the both. But that mood disorder is not always a real clinical depression, happily. And when you want to experience a depression a little bit, I'm sure you can do that quite easily. Make yourself very tired and stay up. And don't go to bed, but try to stay active. And then observe yourself, observe what's happening. And then you feel some of the symptoms in a light way of patients with a mood disorder experience that practically every day. And then it's very difficult to experience immediately your low self-esteem and your inferiority feelings, because normally you will not stir them up so easily. But the physical feeling of being tired and feeling down and feeling blue and lack energy is easy to experience in a certain condition. Nowadays, what we see in clinical praxis is that a lot of our patients present symptoms of a mood disorder without having the full condition. But they have several symptoms and they suffer from that. Every 10 years in the Netherlands there is epidemiological research, and then in the Netherlands they check what kinds of psychological and psychiatric disorders are prevalent. And those disorders, amongst other things, anxiety disorders, mood disorders, personality disorders, addictions, ADHD, autism, etc., they practically stay the same during the years. So they do not increase impressively, and they do not decrease, although they are treated a lot. I always think, why don't they disappear? We are treating them. I myself, I'm treating them already for more than 40 years, and they don't disappear. I mean, we had the infectious some diseases, and they disappear after treatment. So I'm always astonished again that they stay coming, that the mood disorders are still there. But the percentage is low, and the amount of people that ask help, that request for help, increases and increases. In our own research, last 20 years, 3 times as many people in the Netherlands asked for psychological and psychiatric help, while the disorders are the same as 20 years ago or 40 years ago. So that's interesting. It has something to do with our culture. And people in our culture tend to psychologize, to make their requests for help in a psychological way, and they present some of those symptoms. You can differentiate between about 8 severe symptoms, and then, well, they present 2 or 3. And you say, well, I feel blue. Do you feel that the whole week? No. 2 days a week. And then it's gone again. Can you still enjoy your life? No, not so well anymore as I used to. But still, when I go to my sportive activity or when I go running, it's okay. And you are still running. You are still running. When you are really depressed, running is a nice therapy, but it's also very difficult to start that. And so the symptom load is less and the request for help is earlier there. And why is there a big request for help? Because also some professionals are there. We have an enormous increase in psychologists, also in psychiatrists, a little less, but we have an enormous increase in coaches and in all other people who give their help in the social field, and the social workers and the therapists with a higher education, some without being a psychotherapist, but there are a lot of professionals around who offer the help, and then people also tend to formulate their problems in the way that it's connected to what the professional offers. So people, if you offer a special treatment for depression, you get all kinds of people. If you look at them critically, they do not have depression, but they formulate their request for help in that way, because they expect something. A mood disorder, in a classical way, is also the product of 3 sources. It's special in that sense that more than other psychological disorders, it is produced in principle by 3 types of determinants: biological, physiological, psychological, and cultural. You can have a mood disorder produced by cultural issues. If you get fired in your enterprise, if you lose your job, that can, for some people, that can be a reason for a minor depression. And then the treatment is not talk with a psychotherapist or swallow medication, but is go to the trade unions or take a nice, good lawyer and take care of yourself. You have depressions in which biology and physiology is primary. You have those depressions. They are also specific. They are recurrent. They come back each time. They have no visible stimulus. So there is not something happens and you react with a depression. No, the depression more or less comes from the inside. And you don't know why you get depressed. There's nothing happened. There was no special occasion. But still there is that depression. And then you see the depression in the family. You see the depression with the father or mother or brother or sister or uncle. So you see that there's a contribution from the family background. And especially in a mood disorder that's produced by mainly physiological, biological some determinants, is that you lose the capacity to enjoy. You lose your deep-seated wishes and you are unable to enjoy life. If I have a grandfather in my consulting room who has a depression, my first question is, can you still enjoy your grandchildren? When he tells me no, I'm getting very careful and I'm going to assess adequately what all traits of his mood disorder are. I look at his suicidal wishes because I know then there is a severe depression in which biological some determinants play a role. Then, of course, most of the mood disorders are not so much caused by biology, physiology, or by social cultural aspects, but later on tonight we maybe change our opinion on this. But most in the individualized culture in the West, most mood disorders or traits of a mood disorder are produced by psychological determinants, psychological mechanisms. Let's take a few. When you are more introverted than extroverted, and when you get hurt in social communication, you are like a vacuum cleaner. You suck everything in. And in the end, you forget to empty your sack. the full sack. Huh? And it's becoming tough inside, and it will influence your mood. And also, especially when irritation and aggression is gone inside, is inward directed instead of outward, then the chance that you get a mood disorder is bigger. When next to your social happenings, you are a good soccer player, you can lose aggression at the soccer field. That brings you in balance, but then you have a sport blessure and you are not able to play soccer anymore, and then all the aggression stays inside. Suicidality, when you want to kill yourself, that means that you give yourself the death penalty. So bad do you think about yourself, so severe are the remorses, so severe is the self-blame. So that's one mechanism, introjection of aggression, we call that. Then especially in ladies, there are ladies here also. I'm not talking about the ladies here, but especially in ladies in the Western world, you see something else. Some of these ladies tend to have inside themselves, without them knowing it, most of the time, they have a very critical teacher inside. A critical teacher inside their psychological architecture, and that the teacher tells them every time, you're not good enough. No, 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 no. You can do better. Yeah. Okay, you had an A? No, no, no. You can do better. And take care. And be more perfectionistic. And take all the time for study. And then each time, the evaluation of the own person, the inside evaluation, is very critical and negative. And that, we call that in psychodynamics, we call that a very severe superego. That superego, the values and the stick in which they measure themselves with, is very severe. And that the critical part of themselves is part of upbringing, and it's part of fantasized relationships they had in earlier life. They internalize that fantasized relationships, and they build it up until a strong person, critical teacher person. And I tend to analyze that in my female patients and try to make them conscious of that evaluation. And then they are going to, gradually they are going to feel and see how self-critical they are. And in every part of life, that self-critical attitude is there and forces them in a position that's vulnerable. So that's an interesting aspects, especially in female. You also find it in males, but more in females. Also female students nowadays, they perform better than the males. They are more conscientious. They are more. That all has to do, of course, with the self-critical attitude. It also prevents them from enjoyment, from lust, from being able to feel aggression and erotic feelings. But they tend to think a lot. And people with a mood disorder, sometimes they only live in their head. And they tell you about the brooding and the thinking and the obsessions. And for them it's difficult to relax and listen to their bodily feelings and integrate more their feelings, fantasies, and express them more. So there's a break on their system, and there is that critical topic. So you see that in the West. I think that's typically in the West, and in the end it has to do with our individualization of our culture. That is the part, it started with the ancient Greek and the Romans, and we had the Renaissance and Enlightenment, and that all produced individualized people, people who have their own identity, their own self. It's quite difficult from an African or an Eastern culture in which the surroundings and the family are more crucial, and there's less pressure on the identity, and there's less pressure to develop their own identity. So that's one part. Another part of according to my observations in the last 20 years, is that of course we had the millennials, we had our generation Y and the millennials since the 1980s. And they were brought up in a quite prosperous economic period. where everybody has enough money and people were able to develop themselves and to work with their own desires and demands and realize their personal wishes. And the parents were very careful with their kids. And when they had to go to the school, they brought them on the back bench of the car. From the school, they had to go to the swimming pool for the swimming lessons. They brought them with the car to the swimming lessons. And they didn't need to be outside or in the rain or on the bicycle or walking. And parents tend to be very careful and guide the children in everything. Oh, take care, don't do this and don't do that. So that neurotic attitude, which is very much criticized already by ancient philosophers, like Rousseau and Kant, they already said, well, you shouldn't do that, because then the buffer that you create amongst your child doesn't give them the chance to experience life and to experience the social environment and get a blue eye or a bleeding nose or drop from the bicycle in the strong wind or be entirely wet, soaking wet, come at home and feel that frustration. So for your self-esteem, wrestling with frustrations is very helpful for the self-esteem in your psychological back office. And that was more or less taken out of the upbringing for a certain generation, not the whole generation, but part of it. And what they did, instead of that, they painted the front office of those youngsters. 5 minutes? 3 minutes. They painted the front office of the youngsters because they came home 4 years old and they had a drawing from the primary school or the kindergarten. And then the parents say, oh, beautiful. Oh, what a beautiful drawing. Everything is perfect. Instead of that the parents say, okay, it's quite nice, but you can do better. It's all yellow there and there it's still white. Why not paint a little bit more? When you do that, the child is immediately trying to improve itself. And that's a crucial psychological mechanism in the upbringing. Having frustration and also having them strive to making the product and itself better. So their front office, their psychological front office, is then painted in an easy way. The children get the idea of, I'm fine, I'm okay, I'm doing good. And when they can learn good, and when they are good in sports, then they are 21, 22, and they are for the first time in society having a job. In the societal jungle, having a job. And there, after 3 months, they get a feedback session from their CEO, the manager, and he criticizes the young lady or man. And then sometimes that's the first time in life that they really hear criticism. So they get in a crisis and they come to us. And they ask for help. They have something, well, what's happening to me? I get a burnout. Now they're talking about burnout when they are 23. And burnout looks like a depression most of the time. It is not completely the same, but burnout was meant for people who were working 30 years in the education or in healthcare. And now the youngsters are there in our praxis and asking help. And then you see that they were not very much equipped in their back office to tolerate frustration and have a severe tendency to achieve. And were able to have setbacks and drawbacks and then fight back. So that back office force, that's also crucial for the self-esteem, is lacking a little more than people who were born in the 60s or in the 50s. So there's also that cultural influence on the upbringing, and that upbringing is the parents who want to do it really well, a little bit too well, and they were a little bit too careful, a little bit too much protection, and then the possibility to tolerate frustration, also tolerate depression as a part of daily life. Nobody is cheerful except Pius. Nobody is cheerful all day long. Maybe in Africa they are. I'm very angered to hear about that. But normally we have the moods, the normal mood swings. And then there is you need the tolerance for that. You need to be able to cope with that. Thank you very much.
bedankt, Jan. We zien je zo weer terug naar... sorry. Thanks, Jan. We'll be discussing it further a little bit, but no, I made a mistake in presenting the speakers to you, because I said we would be listening to... now I'm getting confused again. I said we would go listening to Angela again, but we're not. We're going first to Pius, because that's how the PowerPoint presentations are structured. So otherwise everything would go wrong. And we did put some thought in the structure at some point, but now I cannot remember why, but there will be something to it. So I would like to have a warm welcome for Pius Mosima.
Hello, good evening to everyone. I'm Pius Mosima. I'm from Cameroon, the English-speaking side of Cameroon. And like Lisa said, I'm a philosopher, and an African philosopher. And today I will talk to you about the way Africans conceive this number one problem that we face in the Netherlands and all over the world, called depression. But I know I'm not speaking to professional philosophers, so I'll try to go down to earth, because that may even cause you more depression. If I start talking lots of concepts and abstract things here, you may not get to what I actually want to say. And this is how I'll proceed. I'll first of all briefly define what African philosophy is all about, explain what intercultural philosophy is all about, show you briefly how African philosophy is linked to intercultural philosophy, and then I'll go to the heart of the matter, how the concept of depression is, what it means in African traditional thought. And then the next point, I'll look at whether there is a difference, how depression is treated or viewed from an African perspective as opposed to what obtains in the Netherlands and the rest of the North Atlantic. And finally, I'll ask this fundamental question, whether it is possible for us to use African healing systems or rituals to treat somebody who is suffering from depression in the North Atlantic. What is African philosophy? If I stand here to define African philosophy, if you have been reading about philosophy globally, you will realize that African philosophy itself started from frustration, depression, and today it has moved to impression and admiration. What does that mean? Even if you are depressed, depression should be a starting point for you to become a better person. And I will show you how in Africa we can move from frustration, depression, to impression and admiration. And Jan is right to say that Pius is always a very happy person. I come from a very happy background. In our society, we are dancing. In spite of the poverty, in spite of the AIDS, in spite of the wars, we try to be happy. And I'll show you what makes us happy. When things go wrong, I go back there and take my inspiration and continue being happy. So, why was African philosophy feeling so depressed? African philosophy was so depressed because of racism. Some Western philosophers said, Africans cannot reason. Africans don't have a philosophy. Africans are primitives. Africans are savage. Is that not enough reason to cause us depression? It's enough reason to cause depression and frustration. But what did Africans do? Thanks to another Westerner, Father Placide Tempels, the Belgian priest, he came and said Africans can have a philosophy. And from that day, all of us have picked up from that frustration and that depression, and we have been able to come today and we are talking what African philosophy is all about. If you read Hegel, you read Kant, you read Rousseau, I don't need to go Lucien Lévy-Bruhl. If you read what they said about Africa, it was already a starting point for terrible depression, terrible frustration. But today, African philosophy exists. And what is this philosophy? It is the worldview of the African. It is the way Africans are able to critically examine their essence and existence. Now, there is a problem with this definition because I'm moving to a next step, intercultural philosophy. And I will show you how when we define African philosophy, limiting it to a particular perception, we cannot heal depression globally. Because today, we talk of migration, we talk of interconnectedness, we talk of movement. I left Yaoundé yesterday at 10 p.m. By 10 a.m., I was already in Amsterdam. Life is moving so fast. We are meeting, we are migrating, we are encountering each other. So my techniques of healing depression could also be very instrumental in helping my brothers and sisters out here in the Netherlands. That is why, instead of talking of a specific African philosophy, I prefer to talk about intercultural philosophy. What is this intercultural philosophy? Intercultural philosophy is recognizing the different philosophic traditions from across the globe. It is considering that every part of the globe has their own contribution to make as far as philosophizing is concerned. And so, this has a relevance as far as treating depression is concerned. Because I have the impression that only one part of the universe or of the globe think that, they are depressed and think they hold a monopoly of a solution to depression. So when Lisa called me, I was so happy. I said, let me tell my Dutch brothers and sisters how an alternative perspective could contribute, could cross-fertilize their notion and even therapy as far as depression is concerned. So I will not go as a specialist to be describing, to be defining intercultural philosophy to you, but that is just what I have in mind. And so, how is intercultural African philosophy linked to intercultural philosophy? Like I've mentioned, the first thing, we have to deconstruct that racist tendency towards Africans. Second, we have to rethink this notion of culture. Culture is not static. It is not fixist. It is open. It is performative. And so we have to talk of intercultural encounters. I leave it there because I know very soon Lisa will be pointing her watch to me that it is time. Let me touch the heart of the matter now. What does the concept of depression mean in African traditional thought? All knowledge is culturally determined. And every community interprets a phenomena in its own way. Like she mentioned before, when I was called to give this paper, I sent emails to friends in South Africa, to friends in Nigeria, to Ghana. I asked them, is there any traditional, because I asked people around, how do we call depression? They told me, there is no word in our indigenous languages for depression. I said, come on, how come? I tried to Google all over, search all over, send emails, they said there is no word for that. It means that this notion of depression is something foreign. It is something we don't have in our traditional societies. However, we must not pretend. In our modern African cities today, we find the notion depression. But in our traditional villages, we don't find depression. So I had to work now with pure villagers to tell me what they actually understand about depression. They gave no definition, but they only gave me some characteristics. And let me read them out. My colleague Jan read some. Let me tell you what I heard in Africa. They said, 1, social withdrawal. 2, solipsism. 3, physical and verbal violence. 4, isolation and lack of the zeal to carry out your day-to-day tasks. So these are the characteristics I was given. And so when I found out that what causes one to have these characteristics, what causes depression, the first one they gave me was that a person must have transgressed social norms. Transgressed social norms. What the community puts in place. When you transgress them, it brings depression. I said, okay. The second one, they said, hey, perhaps this person may be possessed by evil spirits. I said, but this is serious. The third, they said, perhaps this person has disrupted the relationship he has between his and the ancestors and the rest of nature. I said, but what is that supposed to mean? So I started trying out to find out, to do more research and evaluate. And let me explain this one. That a person has disrupted the relationship between him and the ancestors. In African ontology, we have what they call the vital force. This vital force is the force that runs from God through the sub-gods, the divinities, to man, to trees, to stones, and to all of nature. This force is the force that gives life. Now, to live in harmony in this great chain of being, in this collective ontology, you need to respect societal norms. You need to follow what the community does. If you don't follow, you will have lots of trouble in the African traditional society. So for them, it is participating in this collective ontology that makes a person. I'll come back to that. The next one, he must have been possessed by an evil spirit. That evil spirits are tormenting him. First comment, in Africa, when somebody is seriously ill, it may be that evil spirits have touched the person. But the reason for evil spirits to touch the person is because they want the person to be transformed to become a healer later on. So when you are sick and showing all those symptoms, the community just watches you. And they pray and pour libation. Like I was showing my colleague Jan there how we pour libation. The eldest person stands and is pouring, and all put their hands behind. They pour libations and watch, because the young man coming or the young lady sick could be prepared to become a healer. Why? After that therapy, that person becomes a better leader. Or two, the ancestors may want to frown on what the lineage or the society is doing, and so they make that person to be sick. Or when you want to install a chief or a leader in a village, that person falls sick and goes and lives where the ancestors are to get divine powers. And so, to understand how depression comes in the African context, first of all, when you don't participate, like I earlier mentioned, in this collective ontology, in this vital force with the ancestors, it can lead to depression. If you forget or neglect your ancestors, it can lead to depression. Who are ancestors? In our society, an ancestor is somebody who lived a good life. We call them the living dead. Even though they have died, they are still alive. We pour libation, we pray for them. You do the same. We have the calls of saints. I'm a Christian as well. We pray for the saints. In Africa, it is very, very active, very, very lively. We are very serious about our pour libation. The person who lived a good life, who had a family, who died a good death. Don't go and steal, and when you are shot, they say you are an ancestor. You cannot be an ancestor. You must live a good life and die a good death. We call on them. We see them in our dreams. They come and they speak to us. So when you participate in this vital force, you are called an ancestor. And so, all those who participate in this force, when you disrupt it, you are bound to have depression. The next point I want to show, I'll just talk briefly. African social life is communalistic in theory and practice. We call that Afro-communitarianism. We are not saying that in the West you don't live in a community. In Africa, it is so evident. They have sayings like, I am because you are. And since you are, therefore I am. John Beatty said that. I am because you are. Since you are, therefore I am. Try that, you see. You will hardly have depression. When you have genuine friends, I am because you are. Since you are, therefore I am. You'll be happy. That's why I'm always a happy man. I have my friends here. I know how to turn around. They'll give me what I want. I'll go back to Cameroon very happy. Yes. But when you don't have genuine friends, when you don't have others who will pray, you are wasting your time. There is this notion of Ubuntu in South Africa. I thought it was a joke. Visit a South African who practices Ubuntu. Ubuntu, Gamantu, Gamuntu. A person is a person through other persons. Try it. Depression cannot be a portion. It is because we avoid other people. And I will show you why in your Western community, it is so preponderant. It is the individual. Nami. We say it in Pidgin, Cameroon. Nami. No. A person is a person through other persons. If you are not with other people, you cannot make it in our African communitarian life. So when you are not living a communal life, you are bound to have depression. We even call you at times a witch. And perhaps one of the best ways to understand the issue of depression is to look at the African notion of personhood. And this is one of the crux of the matter. In Africa, a person is a relational person. A person is one who relates with others, who participates with others. In fact, in our ethics, the notion personhood is a value-laden concept. You see, when you are compassionate, tolerant, care for others, when you live in harmony with the society, you are a person. So the ultimate goal of every individual is to become a full person or a genuine person. To say that somebody is a person is one who is friendly, who is kind, who is hospitable, who is caring. When you say this person does not have personhood or the person lacks Ubuntu, is one who is stingy, who is greedy, who is selfish, etc. Now, philosophers have made the world follow a certain orientation. But my dear brothers and sisters, read philosophy with a critical eye. Don't take philosophers for the gospel truth. Especially those who sit in one corner of the world and dictate the pace to the rest of the world. Read philosophy critically. I have a lot of respect for Kant, for Hobbes, for Locke, and Descartes. But there are some fundamental things they said which seem to be controlling the rest of the world today. Descartes says, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Okay. It's good. Children are now following you the whole world today. I think it is me. So since it's I can shoot everybody and go away. No care for community, even for the body. Look at the second meditation. Those who have read Descartes on the nature of the human mind, that it is more easily known than the body. That's all. That's what Descartes says. The body for him, the body for him. No way. He makes this dualism between the mind and the body. And so we spend our whole time, the ego. Our psychologist was telling us about the superego, etc. I was just looking at him and laughing. That is true. That is the way the Western mind has been fabricated, not only fabricated, fixed to conceive the person as me alone. And I don't blame the Western mind. You want to achieve goals. I want to be a professor. I want to be this. I want to be that. I was just telling them today, don't worry me about time, eh? I was telling them about how I got a doctorate late because my supervisor was not well and was delaying, but I had been teaching a long time. Another reason why I delayed to defend the PhD was because of children and the African family. I cannot leave my brothers and sisters. We are living in that extended family. You must take care of them. When your mother is sick, you must feel. I hear in some societies where your parents are old, you take them and send the old in the house of the old because you want to satisfy your personal ego. It doesn't work that way. So all of these cause depression. And so when Descartes rejects the body as some that can be rejected, overhauled as an engine, look at adverts today. You see nice young boys and girls. The old people are rejected. They have no place. It is not correct. Now, question number 5. Is there a difference on how depression is treated or viewed in Africa as opposed to what obtains in the Netherlands? Yes. Here, psychotherapy, depression is a private thing. You go and meet a psychotherapist, you do what they call free association. You talk with him. You discuss. It is very confidential because it's a matter between the patient and the therapist. At times, you even talk, they take up pills and give you, calm down this, placebo, do this for yourself. In Africa, it's not like that. Healing is an integral part of the society and the religion. It is a public thing. The whole village comes out and sits open in the yard, and you talk, and they heal you there. The therapists, they do the healing there. It's not a private thing. The whole community is involved. Secondly, rituals are performed. These rituals are performed because they want to create that harmony between you and your community and your brothers and sisters who are dead and their ancestors, etc. So it is a way of transforming the individual. Transforming the individual and giving him redress and fulfillment. But watch out. It is not just the individual who is being transformed. It is both the individual and the community. Why? Because if the individual is sick, community also is sick. When community is sick, the individual is sick. So it is a general thing. People come out and they look at that. So this treatment is holistic. They share, they buy goats, they buy fowls, and they kill. Everybody comes out and eats and drinks out in the open yard. And then one shocking thing, there is no title in Africa like a therapist or a patient. Somebody is sick, yes. But like I said, in Africa, the patient ends up even becoming a therapist because of that transformation, like I said before. So that gap is not there. That difference is not there. And then there is something I don't know what it obtains here. Music, dancing, singing, etc. Calling the ancestors through the drums, through the music. Some of us are so busy that we don't even dance. We don't have time to dance. We don't have time to sing. Through dancing, you see that redress. The dance in circles. Oh, this one will cause me depression. So they dance in circles. They dance in circles. And when they dance, they redress themselves. We don't use pills, like I said. We use cattle, we use beads, etc. The last thing I want to mention before I go is that, okay, if I am proposing you to use African techniques of therapy, African ways of therapy, you don't have our ancestors. How will you do it? That's so. Because I say it's a link with our ancestors. Our ancestors are there. You don't have our ancestors. How can you come to Africa and be healed? Or how can I help you if you have those difficulties? That is why I think Lisa was smart. The notion of intercultural philosophy comes in. We need to change perspectives. I am a Christian, an ex-seminarian, a fervent Catholic. I pray the rosary every time I receive Holy Communion, but it doesn't mean that I don't share, my African traditional beliefs. You can still follow African norms, the African way of the community, the African way of living the life with their brothers in society and get healed. I don't know, some of you must have heard of Wim van Binsbergen. He became a Sangoma in South Africa, a Dutch professor. Went to South Africa, he was very sick. When he became sick, and the wife, he was transformed into a healer. And today, as we speak, he uses the internet to do consultation and throws the oracle and comes out with advice to counsel people. So, but when I ask this question, it's because I want to say that, please, the North Atlantic does not have a monopoly of knowledge. Nobody has a monopoly of knowledge. We need to cross-fertilize each other. Be humble enough, dialogue enough, and come out to ask other people what is happening to you. I got my visa only on Thursday or Friday. I was being depressed. What happened? I sent Lisa an email Send her an email and say, please, what did Lisa do? Lisa called the embassy, and the following day I was called to get my visa. If I stayed quiet alone in my house, would I have had the visa? No. So you don't know even how to dialogue. Talk out your problems. Some of you are suffering alone in the house. You take cigarettes, you take beer, you take... No. When you have a problem, talk it out. I spoke to them, that was on Monday or Tuesday. By Thursday, they called me, doctor, please, can you come to the... I said, wow, come on. I went there, cool, depression gone. But if you have difficulty, you stay with them at home. You will die with them. Go and talk. Okay? Another thing, I'm a philosopher. Modernist philosophy, please. Take it with a pinch of salt. Modernism needs a lot of revisitation. Your professor will tell you later on in school, I don't know. He needs a lot of... Take, for instance, this element of religion that they have just pushed aside. We shove aside religion. It's not fair. It's not fair. It is, don't mind your material and technological advancement. There is something like God. There is a supernatural. Then, the mind has limits, my dear. Most of us are stressed out because we carry so many things in our mind. You cannot do everything. Absolute perfection is not a thing of this world. Where you have limits, accept that you have limits. When you have difficulties, consult your friends. Walk up to them. Talk to them. If I tell you my own problems, you will not believe, but I talk out to people and they help me. Talk out to them. Genuinely, it will work out. Belong to social groups. You may think that, you say, no, I have schoolmates, I have classmates. No. When you go to church, when you go to the football field, like one of my sons is going to watch Ajax Amsterdam tomorrow against Juve in the stadium, was proud to tell me, he's going there with his friends. And they're going to have fun, they're going to share. Belong to those groups. Say your prayers to them. Consult them. Talk to them. Last but not the least, don't overtake those pills. In Africa, we take herbs. Before I go back to Yaoundé, I'll get they know I love herbal teas, and I'll take herbs. And you use herbs. I relax. Keep your mind free. Don't mind the cat. Don't mind the cat too much. Yes, the mind has limits. Because the mind has limits, in Africa we don't say, I think, therefore I am. We say, I am related, therefore I am. I participate, therefore I am. And if you want it, I dance, therefore I am. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You made us dance a bit in our minds. Oh, God. Yeah, it's still working. I'll put it down for you, Angela. So you know the time. So you know you have some time left. And the floor is all yours. Angela Roothaan.
I wanted to show a little video clip. So how do I... Oh, it's already here. Thank you. So what can I say after these two very interesting talks? Well, I took it upon me to talk a little bit about how do we view each other from the different cultures. And so in my title also the word views is a central word. And I wanted to show you a little video clip. Do I... yes? Before we start, let me... No, the other clip, sorry. This one. It is a clip which was made by a Danish aid campaign to raise money to fight extreme poverty. And this little video clip was made, I think, in 2016, and it raised quite some controversy. So let us watch it critically.
A lot of them are commenting on Facebook that so much money is being spent on Africa instead of old people in Denmark. When we had that, we knew we had to do something. Adopt the DIM. That's why we started the Untitled DIM Foundation.
We need to find a place for Uri. His family never visit.
Yes. Thousands of old DIMs need new homes. Old people are not a burden. they are a wonderful gift. In Africa, we cherish our old people. Sure, we might have contaminated water, epidemics, and lack electricity. But it seems from the Facebook comments that old days are worse off. Please let us take care of them.
Remember, we got sweet fly in from Bullock at 5 p.m.
The first old days have already arrived, and they are having a blast. Denmark needs warm hands. Down here, we got plenty. So please, Africa, open your hearts to adopt a Dane.
Yeah. Okay. So this phenomenon, this kind of video, it's called sometimes culture jamming. It's meant to critique certain aspects of culture. And what does it critique or criticize? This video criticizes in difficult and different manners, and I heard you laughing all the time, and that means it is quite confusing. It turns you from one position to the other. It criticizes stereotypical images of Africans as helpless, hungry, etc. It criticizes the self-centeredness of complaining Europeans. And in a more implicit way, it also criticizes Danish strict immigration policies. And the video itself was also very heavily criticized. So why? You all had laughed, so what was wrong with it? People said it exploited other stereotypes of Africans as non-individualistic and community-centered, and that they are all so happy, although Pius said it is true, but some people in Europe think that it's a simplification or romanticization of African life. And a deeper level at which this video is criticized is that it keeps the traditional ways of fundraising out of the picture. So some people say fundraising, charity should not be the way to help poor people. It should be structural changes in economic partnerships, etc. Now, when we think this video showed some, let me not forget my, I thought this already? That my this video criticized stereotypes. So how can we speak about African or Western or European images on mental illness or depression? Some people say, no, you cannot say that Africa is a huge continent with so many cultures. And I always say, well, why then would we speak about Western or European? That's also generalization. A person from Switzerland is very different from a person from Norway or from England or wherever on Europe. So the key is zooming in and zooming out. When you zoom in, you see things in their locality, in their specificity. When you zoom out, you can say general picture and you can speak about things that are African or European. So I don't have a problem with generalizations as such, as long as you know that it's zooming out and that you should zoom in again to say things that are specific. And also when you talk about how do we view each other, how can we speak about depression or mental illness in Africa or in Europe in generality, we should never forget that these phenomena are happen in the framework of historical, economic and political events. And these also make the specific flavor of our images, like in the video we just saw. So with that in mind, generalizations can help to learn from each other. And now I want to say also something about another video clip which shows just one example from a kind of preventive mental health care in Zimbabwe, which is a country with, which has, like many African countries, many structural problems in public spending and public infrastructure, and as you can see on the slide, that it has only 12 public health psychiatrists in the whole country, which is very little. So can we see this next video? It's about the grandmothers.
Tafadzwa argues all the time with her husband about money. Zimbabwe's worsening economic crisis doesn't help matters. She became depressed because there was no one she felt comfortable talking to about her problems. Then she heard about the grandmother health providers and their friendship benches.
This grandmother helped me. She said every marriage has problems and that I must not give up.
When Rosemary Mukarate's husband died, his family evicted her and the children from the house. This happens a lot to women in Zimbabwe.
I was going to kill myself because I was very lonely and I was very disappointed. Yeah, but with this friendship bench, it helped me so much.
Friendship benches are simple-looking wooden benches placed outside state-run health centers. Doctors call it basic problem-solving therapy. The grandmothers get a few weeks training, learning how to give advice and listening to people's problems, something they already do as elders in their own families. They say they feel needed.
Some people died because of lack of knowledge. Some committed suicide because of lack of knowledge. There were no people to discuss their problems with.
Zimbabwe's public health system, like other sectors, is suffering financial crisis. Doctors say there are only 12 public health psychiatrists in the whole country.
1 in 4 people can be affected with mental health disorders, not just in Zimbabwe. It's a global problem. If you look at the World Health Organization's estimates right now, by 2020, which is essentially in 3 years' time, depression alone will be the leading cause of disability globally.
The grandmothers are paid a basic salary by the state, but there isn't enough cash to expand the help program nationwide. For now, the friendship benches are only found in Chitungwiza, Gweru, and some parts of the capital, Harare. There are about 300 trained health providers. So far, nearly 28,000 people have received free counseling. Doctors and patients say the friendship benches are working. Doctors say for now the friendship benches are only found in Zimbabwe, but they believe they could be utilized in communities anywhere in the world, and sometimes simple interventions are the most effective. Harumutasa, Al Jazeera, Harare.
Okay. So, I think this clip shows a form of what I call preventive healthcare. It's preventive not in the sense that these people not already have problems who are helped, but that these elders, these grandmothers help to solve problems before they get out of hand and lead to severe depressions. So what is, you can say 2 things about this video. On the one hand, it has to do also with structural poverty. So you don't have trained psychiatrists, so you train older women who have time on their hands to just sit on a bench and give people advice about their problems. The other thing which is interesting is that they are termed grandmothers, and that adds something to the story that Pius told us when he said, we take care of people in the family. I think the term family in this sense is taken in a very wide sense. So when you call someone a grandmother who's not your biological grandmother, that's very normal in African context, I think, to speak of younger people as your sons or your cousins or your. So you give people family names, and that makes you to a family in a certain way. And in that sense, only the name you give of the people who help you changes something in how you view things. So, but I have to cut it short, I think, Lisa. Yes. So this more or less recaptures a bit what Pius told much more elaborately. That when he spoke about healthcare in the village, so that's traditional healthcare, and traditional forms of healthcare all over the world are less focused on cure or on treatment, but more focused on prevention. And when you speak about mental health, there are certain African cultural elements which may be especially good in terms of prevention because of this focus on what is called Ubuntu, which is a term for this being connected, being a part of this life energy which flows through all that is. So that's the interconnectedness of all life. Now here are some elements of traditional healing. I have only one more slide after this to say something about the Western view, because I want to look at how do we view each other. So these are things which may appeal or appall Westerners when they think of traditional healing. So healing is not identical to curing. You cure a disease or you cure a certain problem, but healing is more holistic. Healing looks on the disrupted relations. Rituals may support. This is also a recapturing of what we already heard. Another element is that when you go to a healer, you give offerings instead of paying. So offerings is giving something back to the community, because your relations with the community are disturbed. So when you give something to the community, this may already help you to heal, to reorder your life towards communal goals and values, and that may be possibly combined with herbal or dietary treatments. So what are the main elements of modern therapy? I cannot be too specific, of course. I'm not a specialist like Jan Derksen, who we heard before, but these are some elements, I think, which may be very visible when I, from a non-European perspective, would look at Western therapy. So what is very interesting in our approach is that we make a lot of efforts to understand how the brain or how emotions work. We are also focused on interventions in dysfunctional wirings, like, for instance, EMDR, a very well-known therapy nowadays to cure trauma, psychological trauma. Of course, we are very well known for using medicines to suppress certain aspects of severe disorders. And the last word is, the last bullet is more about what especially psychoanalysis has developed, but it's also in a lot of Western therapies, it's a key element, that we look towards understanding our mental problems, that we are also focused on expressing what hurts us, on articulating suppressed memories. It's in many therapies, it's important. And on empowering through this speech, through these articulations, through finding words, through naming things, by making certain things conscious, which you had forgotten or were not aware of, the person who suffers from mental problems. And I think that especially this last element, which is also expressive of the whole Western tradition of philosophy and trying to understand life, this curiousness of how does it work, and who are we, and how can we find language for it. I think that's something which the Western approach has to contribute to the intercultural dialogue on mental health issues. So I will leave it here, and we have a discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Yes, please join us. I go sit in the corner. All right, sorry. Before I start, as opposed to what was mentioned on our website, we will not end this program tonight at 10, but at 9:45, which leaves us 25 minutes, which is not a lot. But fortunately, a lot has been said. Let's dive into matters further for about 10 minutes, and then I'm sure you've got a lot of questions. So I want to attend to those too. But first, Jan, I'm curious as to what you think of the role of the therapist in, so if we take the African perspective, it seems that therapists might not be really needed. We could use grandmothers, maybe we could use our our friends, our family, we should talk to them more. How is that for you as a clinical psychologist?
Yes,
Do
I
you
can.
feel redundant now?
I can understand it. I mean, as human animals, we are integrated in our biology and physiology, and we are integrated in our social, cultural processes. But in the African culture, the integration in the social structures and the cultural patterns is much stronger. And that integration is very much a support for the psychological processes. And in our individualized culture, we are integrated the same way, but we do not experience the social integration in the way like they do that in Africa. And we experience our individual disorders also really individually. So we need our psychotherapist.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can change that.
For us, those grandmothers wouldn't really work.
No, and we've tried that many times, and we have had a minister of healthcare who said, well, the neighbor is also very well, but that for people who are really informed about this topic, that's nonsense. For our structure, our intrapersonal, our psychological architecture, it's different from birth on. The way in which we are psychologically formed has to do with our attachment relationship, and our attachment relationship is culturally structured. And in Cameroon, the attachment relationship is completely different, has a completely different structure. So the internal psychological world is different.
So then you're referring to the fact that whereas in the West we generally live as a nuclear family, so there's a mother and there's a father and there's children. In Cameroon and most African countries, you have the families extended.
And the personal differentiation and the articulation of your personal desires and wishes in the West is much stronger. It's based about our 2,000 years of history. And so that forms our needs and that forms our desires. And you cannot say, well, now you go dancing in the West and that will cure your depression. No.
Yeah.
For some people maybe, but not as a cure for everybody.
Yeah.
Although I like it very much when I hear it, but I see the way in which people are socially integrated is so different that I can understand very well that the way in which you approach those disorders, if they are there, is also completely different. And that's also good. It's equally good for them as our way is for us.
Yeah, but that's interesting. So there seems to be, I don't know, there seems to be for us in the West the idea that maybe we can learn something from the African culture. When we thought about what we would program for you tonight, we had the idea that we can learn something from other cultures. But are we idealizing when we do this? And this is a question I think for you, Pius, as well. Are you idealizing the West maybe, as we are idealizing Africa in a way? And when does that go wrong? What can it teach you, and when does it go wrong?
Absolutely not. I'm happy. I'm very happy with what Jan has said. But let me define the African family again.
Okay.
It is not just extended. Even children to be born are part of the African family. That's why for a girl to commit an abortion is terrible. So girls, abortion is not treated there with a joke. And then those who have died ancestors are also part of the African family. I mentioned something here about intercultural philosophy, borrowing, cross-fertilizing. In fact, a modern-day psychiatrist like in Zimbabwe is much needed in Africa as well. Times are changing. Globalization. Marty is coming to Cameroon to visit me soon. He may come there with his Ajax depressions. That Pius, can you help me with my Ajax problems? I will know the African way, but he needs to visit a formal psychotherapist. So we need the two. And I think, Jan, even though the West has been constructed 2,000 years ago following certain norms, I mentioned something here, we need to change perspective. There are certain things we need to deconstruct. This notion of community. my brothers, this notion of community is very, very important. If it is not well knit and constructed here, we are all young people. Let us try and start building up a new community where we meet and articulate with other people. I think so.
But maybe then, so okay, build a new community, but without idealizing what it can give us, or without the idealization.
When you idealize a community, you romanticize it.
Yeah.
It becomes an absolute. And like in my own view of intercultural philosophy, absolutes have no place. Intercultural philosophy is a construction of numerous relatives. It is a synthesis, not a syncretism. It is a synthesis coming together. It is difficult, but that's why we are experts. Let us forge ahead. Let us look for new ways of striking the balance between the absolutes and the relatives. That's why we look at the way I was explaining intercultural philosophy. You have the generalizing perspective and the particularizing perspective. And I've always tried to frown at those who sit at one end of the world and dictate at the rest end of the world. Because of time, I would have told you other things about the hermeneutics. Interpreting things in their context. And we all agree here that when we look at things from that perspective, we all move on.
Yeah. Angela?
Yeah, I think that's also why I introduced these terms, zooming in and zooming out. Because zooming out means that you can look at the culture in a general way without absolutizing, because you know that you're zooming out. So I can say Africans have a more communal society or whatever, or more holistic way of seeing the world. And I know that in that moment I'm zooming out, because it would be different when I was speaking about a certain people in the Gambia, or about a certain specific history in Kenya or whatever. So it's always a generalization, and also when we talk about Europeans or Westerners, as if we were the same since the ancient Greeks. Ancient Greeks would be more like Africans, I think, than we would like. But we construct our identities and the others' identities, and that's not a problem as long as we know that it's a temporary thing to understand and to confront and to compare, and then you can move on and know that in the end, of course, we are all humans dealing with the same existential issues about death and health and not belonging and being frustrated, or also the joys.
Yeah. But in what sense then, to return to depression specifically, is this an existential problem that is shared? So worldwide. So you mentioned there's no word for it in in any African language that tells us something, but there was something interesting going on in what you said about how it is construed, depression in Africa, social withdrawal, solipsism and isolation. I noted these three. So there's can you relate this, Jan, to the Western take of depression? Is it similar, right?
Well, it is similar in a certain way. When you look at depression, at the deeper seated core of a mood disorder is relational. Either the relationship with yourself, you internalized others, the critical ladies inside yourself, or a teacher inside yourself. That's also a internalization of a former relationship. When you are more introverted, you connect less. That's what they do. That's what they fight against in Africa. They express themselves more, also in dance. So when you are more introverted, you disconnect from people, from your social community, and when you introject aggressive feelings, it means that you do not express that aggression. So when you look at it from the relational point of view, you can state that every depression has a disorder, a disturbance of an intimate relationship. And
either
there,
with
I
others
think,
or
yes,
with yourself.
yes, and with somebody else in yourselves, and internalization. So in that sense, we are talking about the same things.
Yeah.
Agree?
Yeah,
Yeah.
very. It just tells us again the fundamental unity of humankind.
Yes.
It tells us when you talk of existential situations. I've used words here, solipsism. Those are all English words. They are all universal.
Yeah.
So it comes back to this element of
Yes.
our fundamental oneness of humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we make it more complicated in the West. Huh? we
Why do we do that? Do we enjoy it?
No, it's part of our very different ideological structures in our society. So we internalize more, and then we make a mess of it.
Yeah.
And you make less a mess of it. You express it, and you are part of the subgroup. And
You say no. This is idealization, or
No, I think that's generalization and simplification.
Yeah,
I think
of course.
from my connections with people from Africa, I know that they also can make things very difficult. For themselves and for others.
It's a pity.
You're exaggerating. Anyway, I was about saying about religion before you asked the question, Elisa. I'm sorry, let me just intervene. Mudimbe, heard of Valentine Mudimbe before?
No.
Mudimbe, a retired former Mudimbe. You should have talked about Mudimbe.
Important African philosopher.
Very important. It talks of an incredible, incomprehensible miracle. This element of appropriation that culture should be ready to learn. Look at Christianity. Christianity left Europe and came to Africa. But today, it is Africans rather coming to convert Europe and the rest of the world. Africans have appropriated Christianity, and if you go all over the place, it's Christianity. It doesn't mean that they have left their roots. They are still there, but they try to dangle the two.